Hello, my name is Trent. I'm going to give a history of the social work profession from a Native American perspective. I'm going to start out here with a quote from a gentleman named Luther Standing Bear. He says, quote, "There is not and never has been a human attitude taken toward the Indian, no acknowledgement of his virtues, no friendly acceptance of his native abilities. He has been made to feel his segregation. Since the Indian wars ended, the white man has so busied himself, wresting riches from the land, that its people have been forgotten. Forgotten save for a few friends and humanitarians, whose sensitive souls are uneasy and irritated as long as the voices of the oppressed are audible." So, first section here, I'm going to dive in a little bit to Luther Standing Bear's background. Like I say here in the slide, he was a forerunner of the Native American social work, um, a history of our profession from the lens of a Native American background. Standing Bear was a guy who was definitely had one foot in Native American culture and one foot in the dominant mainstream white culture. Born in 1868 in what is now the Rosebud Indian Reservation here in South Dakota. He was of two different nations. One was the Sinkangu, or the Brule, as well as the Oglala Lakota. So both of those groups, the Brule would be found in the Rosebud area, more concentrated in the Rosebud area today, whereas the Oglala Lakota would be found more concentrated near the Pine Ridge Reservation, also here in South Dakota. So in 1879, Luther Standing Bear was sent to the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, which is out in Pennsylvania. That was the flagship boarding school for Native Americans at that time. That's where Standing Bear received a Western education. They cut his hair. They forbade him to speak his native language, use native dress. He was, along with hundreds and thousands of other native children, forced to assimilate into white culture. So we're going to look here a little bit at the history of mainstream social work in native populations over time. So probably the darkest point of mainstream social work with this population would be what is now known as the boarding school era. Like I mentioned, Standing Bear was sent out to the Carlisle Indian School, but thousands of other Native Americans were sent out to various Indian boarding schools across the country. The goal here was to assimilate them into white culture. Mainstream white society, and definitely the profession of social work at this time, were the forerunners of what would later become social work, thought that they were doing these Native children a favor, and they were actually helping them by assimilating them, or helping them assimilate to white society. The informal slogan, I guess, of this era was "Kill the Indian, save the man." I'm not going to I'm not going to talk too much about the Wheeler Howard Act of 1934, but suffice it to say that under that act, the U.S. government brought to various native reservations a hierarchical structure that really prized the pursuit of power rather than like kinship and cooperation. Just really went against how these native societies were set up. Aside from the boarding school era, another huge part of social work history with the Native American population has been the effect that CPS, Child Protective Services, has had on that population. The removal of Native children from their homes and communities has been a running theme throughout the social work history with this population. So much so that in 1978, the U.S. government passed the Indian Child Welfare Act, which the whole goal there was to keep Native American children closer to their families and communities. So if the state deemed that they were in an area that was, or in a home that was considered quote unquote dangerous, they'd go to a family member. Or if they couldn't go to a family member, they'd stay at least within their community. We're going to look here a little bit now at the impact mainstream social work and just policies in general have had on the Native American population. So, I mean, the impact has not been good. We're looking at oppression, loss of culture, tradition, spirituality, language, overwhelming poverty, issues regarding mental and physical health, chemical dependency, alcoholism, crime, domestic violence, poor infrastructure, education, policing, etc. Forcing Native Americans into blocked off areas of land, taking them away from their traditional, in the case of the Lakota, let's say, traditional hunter gatherer societies. It's just decimated the population. So, how can mainstream social work reverse these negative outcomes? Well, we have to identify the problem first. And the main problem when we're dealing with the Native American population is if we're coming at this population trying to legitimately help them from the mainstream clinical social work lens, we have to realize that implicit in this philosophy is a cultural superiority. Now, because of all these negative impacts, and especially because of the forced removal of Native American children over decades, a lot of Native clients have they look askance at our profession. A lot of them see social work as a vehicle for oppression and colonization. Now, the reaction to this has been from the social work community. There's been kind of two schools of thought. One is, well, we need to train more Native American social workers, period. They're in the best position to serve their clients because they come from a similar background. They have similar values. They have experience with that population. And another one, the other school of thought, is to train non-Native social workers in cultural competence. Obviously, we're going to have to do both if we're going to be effective at treating or at least reaching our Native American clients. So we'll go a little bit into that first school of thought here. There are specific collegiate programs across the United States that the stated goal and purpose is to train Native American professional social workers. In my research, I looked at the Kootenai College out in Montana, as well as St. Scholastica. Both those colleges, the social work programs at those colleges get grants specifically to educate, train, and get Native American social workers into the field. However, that being said, only about 1% of all social work graduates are Native American. In terms of cultural competence for non-natives, one of the biggest things that I saw across the various articles in my research was it's going to be imperative for us as non-native social workers to involve family and community in our work, as it's so valued in so many of our native clients' populations and tribes. Um, it's also important for non-native social workers to know the history and impact of oppression that various tribes have gone through. Um, and also just knowing the history and culture of our clients' tribes. There's over 550 federally recognized tribes just in the United States. So knowing our clients, and which tribes they come from, and having a general idea of what that means, what that looks like, and if we don't know, then asking. And then a part of that is the decolonization of our thought process as non-native social workers. Recognize our own cultural biases and lack of knowledge. Now, one of the articles that I read, they went a step further and said that if we're gonna really be able to effectively serve Native American populations, we're going to have to completely start from the ground up and actually use modalities that take a Native American um, concept of reality as the base. Now, in this study, which is from, I have it there at the bottom right hand corner of Hodge et al., they interviewed hundreds of various Native Americans from various tribes, and they came up with kind of a coherent um, modality, what they called the Native American model of wellness, which takes into account four basic areas of spirit, body, mind, and context, and making sure that when we're working with Native American clients, that we are not only treating the individual, but we're treating the harmony of all of these four core aspects. And of course, throughout all of this, we're asking our clients for um, input, and we're asking, um, we're reaching out to family, we're reaching out to the communities, we're reaching out to the elders. So I guess to wrap it up, the history of social work, mainstream social work with this population has not been, um, it's been far from perfect. And if we as professional social workers are going to serve this community, there's going to have to be a lot of educating ourselves, being open-minded, recognizing our own biases, and asking our Native American clients what they need, and asking them to be the expert, and educate us on their culture, and to see how we can effectively use their worldview um, in our work to be able to serve them.